The silence out here was a living thing, a predator that stalked the edges of my waking thoughts. Dean Caldwell, xenolinguist, had spent months deciphering the whispers of nothing, the low, resonant hum of the void, convinced there was a language in its emptiness, a grammar in its vast indifference. The Argos, our vessel, hummed a low, constant thrum, a fragile pulse against the boundless, frozen expanse that stretched beyond our viewport. We were further than any expedition before, charting the forgotten territories, the deep-set scars on the world's surface that time and memory had long since abandoned. The star-pricked black above, an endless obsidian vault, pressed down with a weight that felt ancient, not merely astronomical. It was a place where the wind howled not with sound, but with a silent, gnawing hunger, stripping away the very concept of time. Our mission, initially a methodical survey of a seemingly barren region, had settled into a rhythm of monotonous observations, the data streams as flat and unyielding as the landscape itself. The monotony had begun to fray the edges of our collective sanity, a slow, insidious erosion. The navigator, a quiet woman with eyes that had seen too many empty horizons, often stared out, her gaze unfocused, as if searching for something that wasn't there. The engineer, a man of brusque efficiency, had started carving intricate, meaningless symbols into the bulkheads of his station, a silent, desperate act of creation against the overwhelming desolation. But Dean Caldwell, kept my focus. There had to be something. Then the static broke. A jagged, dissonant shriek tore through the comms, rattling the very bones of the Argos. The chief surveyor, a steady hand whose voice rarely deviated from its measured calm, barked orders. Anomaly detected. Repeat, anomaly detected. Unprecedented scale. I scrambled from my station, the metallic tang of fear suddenly sharp on my tongue. On the bridge, the air crackled with a new, raw energy, a stark contrast to the months of hushed routine. The main screen, usually displaying endless white plains or a distant, hazy horizon, now pulsed with a gargantuan, impossible silhouette. What is it? I breathed, the words catching in my throat. The chief surveyor, his face a mask of awe and apprehension, gestured to the screen. You don't know, Caldwell, it's massive, and it's not on any chart, not terrestrial, not geological, not anything we've ever encountered. My eyes traced the impossible angles, the sheer, unimaginable scale of the thing. It was not a mountain nor an iceberg, but something else entirely. It was a wound on the world, a colossal, derelict structure that defied every known law of construction, every understood material science. It simply was. The Argos cut through the thick ice, its reinforced hull groaning in protest as we slowly, painstakingly, approached the colossal form. It was not built of steel or concrete, but of a substance that seemed to absorb light, a dull, obsidian-like material that pulsed with an almost imperceptible internal luminescence. His carvings suddenly seemed less meaningless, more like a desperate, subconscious echo of this very structure. My mind, trained to categorize and translate, struggled against the overwhelming tide of the unknown. This was not merely a discovery. It was a revelation, a silent scream across the ages. The sheer size of it, the impossible scale, made our vessel seem like a forgotten pebble at the foot of an ancient, unforgiving god. This was not merely derelict. It felt like a tomb, a monumental monument to something vast and utterly indifferent. This was not the deep space I had envisioned, the clean, sterile vacuum of the cosmos. This was something older, deeper, rooted in the very marrow of the world. It felt like the land itself had opened, exhaling a forgotten nightmare onto the pristine white. My xenolinguist's instinct, usually a beacon of clarity, now warbled with a strange, dissonant frequency. We were not merely observing an anomaly. We were being observed, judged by something that had been waiting, patient and unmoving beneath the frozen lake for an eternity. The biting wind, a relentless sculptor of frost, whipped around us as we traversed the glassy expanse of the frozen lake. My breath plumed white, a fleeting ghost against the vast pale canvas of the ice. The immense form which had clawed its way from the depths now dominated the horizon, a monolithic bruise against the pallid sky. It was not metal, not stone, but something else entirely, a dark matter that drank the light. Its surface, as we drew nearer, seemed to ripple with a subtle, unsettling texture, like ancient petrified wood or the ridged hide of some abyssal creature. "Approach cautiously." The captain's voice crackled in my comms, tight with a tension that mirrored the knot in my gut. My boots crunched on the crystalline surface, each step a testament to the fragile shell beneath us. The engineer brought up the rear, his heavy steps sounding like dull thuds in the pervasive quiet. As we reached its base, the sheer scale became truly overwhelming. It wasn't merely large, it was ancient. There were no discernible seams, no rivets, no obvious entry points. Just an unbroken obsidian skin that seemed to absorb all sound, all light. Then I saw it, a fissure, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, that had opened in its flank, as if the immense thing had simply exhaled. "This is our entry point," I announced, my voice sounding unnaturally loud against the backdrop of the profound stillness. I peered into the opening. No lights, no hum of machinery. I unholstered my utility tool, its beam cutting a thin, fragile line into the gloom. The walls of the passage were organic, undulating like the inside of a colossal, fossilized esophagus. The passage wound downwards, a helix of forgotten time. There was no sense of engineering, no crafted angles, only curves and spirals that defied any known architectural logic. Just an immense mass. The utter lack of anything familiar was more unnerving than any flickering light or distant thrum. My breath caught. Did I hear something? A faint, reedy note like a forgotten reed pipe playing in the distance. I paused, tilting my head. "Did you hear that?" I asked, turning slightly. The navigator shook her head, her helmeted face an unreadable mask. "Hear what, Dean?" "Nothing," I murmured, dismissing it. The silence was so profound. Perhaps my mind was simply conjuring sounds to fill the vacuum. We continued deeper, the passage narrowing slightly, the air growing heavier, thick with that peculiar earthy scent. The walls seemed to draw closer, their organic texture now more pronounced, almost like bark or desiccated flesh. I could almost feel a subtle vibration beneath my gloved fingertips as I braced myself against one of the undulating surfaces. Not a word, not a language, but a sound like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten graveyard. It was right at the edge of my hearing, a rustle of ancient secrets, just atmospheric resonance. But I knew what I had heard. It wasn't atmospheric. It was intimate, a sound meant for my ears alone. This place wasn't merely empty, it was waiting. A vast, echoing silence that promised more than it withheld. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acridly mineral, pressed against my ears, a physical weight. Every breath I drew tasted of forgotten ages, of things that had lain dormant beneath the crust of the world for longer than history remembered. I felt the slow, deliberate crawl of dread, not a sudden shock, but the kind that sinks into marrow, promising inevitable rot. It was not metal, not stone, but something else entirely, something that blurred the lines between organic and geological. It felt less like a sound and more like an insistent thought, not my own, yet undeniably present. "Dean, are I still out here?" The voice of the team's cartographer, sharp and laced with an edge I hadn't heard before, cut through the quiet. Her headlamp beam sliced through the gloom of the cavernous space, catching dust motes dancing in the heavy air. "The lead researcher wants us to regroup," says he's. My linguistic training, usually a source of detached analysis, was failing me here. There were no known semantic fields for this, no ancient language, no dead dialect, no proto-tongue I had ever studied could account for the language of this place. Yet I felt a peculiar pull, a sense that if I just listened harder, if I just felt deeper, I could unravel its unspoken narrative. It was a terrifying thought, for what truths might such a language hold? We met in what we designated the central chamber, a dizzying expanse where the ribbed walls curved upwards into an unseen zenith. The lead researcher, usually stoic and unshakable, was pacing, his movements jerky and agitated. The field biologist was hunched, tracing patterns on the floor with a gloved finger, muttering to herself about impossible fungi and spores that defied classification. They're not my own. Fragments. Echoes of old arguments, old fears, magnified. He stopped pacing abruptly, fixing his gaze on me. Dean, what is this place? I read the one who hears things others don't. Tell me. I felt a surge of unease. My ability to discern subtle sonic patterns, to reconstruct forgotten linguistic structures from mere phonetic traces, was usually my greatest asset. Here, it felt like a gaping wound. They weren't speaking in any human tongue, but in a language of pure sensation, of raw, primal emotion. And I, with my finely tuned ear, was drinking it in. It's an amplifier, I said, the words tasting metallic on my tongue. It doesn't just radiate something. It takes what's already here within us and turns up the volume. Our anxieties, our doubts. It's making them real, making them loud. As if on cue, a low, guttural growl escaped the field biologist's lips. She looked up, her eyes unfocused, fixed on the cartographer. I always thought I was better than me, she hissed, her voice distorted, thick with venom. Always so precise, so clean, while my work was messy. Well, look at my precious maps now, they're worthless. The cartographer recoiled, her face paling. What are I talking about? I never said that. Oh, but I thought it. The biologist lunged, not with violence, but with a desperate, clawing motion, as if trying to tear something invisible from the cartographer's mind. The lead researcher stepped between them, pushing the biologist back. Stop it, both of I. This is what it wants. His own voice cracked with strain, revealing the immense effort it took to maintain composure. And then, a vision, unbidden and sharp, pierced my mind's eye. I saw not the ribbed walls of the structure, but a vast, desolate expanse of ice. A frozen lake stretching to a horizon swallowed by swirling white. And beneath the ice, in the murky depths, something moved. It was not merely a mental image. It felt like a memory, a primordial fear awakened within me. I stumbled back, bumping into a support pillar that felt strangely warm, almost alive. The structure was not just on the lake. It was the lake, or an extension of it. And we, trapped within this petrified leviathan, were gazing directly into its frigid, ancient soul. It merely waited for our own fears to give it voice. The lead researcher's voice, usually a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of our discoveries, now frayed at the edges, a thin thread stretched taut. Stop it, both of I. This is what it wants. His own words hung in the frigid air, a chilling echo of the unseen malice that had begun to burrow into us. I watched the biologist, still trembling, her eyes wide and unfocused, as the lead researcher gently guided her away from the cartographer. The cartographer, pale and breathing heavily, clutched at his temple as if to press the offending thoughts back into the confines of his skull. The air here, by the vast expanse of the frozen lake, had always been thin and sharp, but now it felt weighted, thick with unspoken accusations. The lake itself stretched out, a colossal sheet of milky white, scarred by ancient cracks that spiderwebbed towards the horizon. Beneath its opaque surface, I knew, lay the submerged remnants of what we had come to find not a vessel of stars, but something far older, far more rooted in the cold, primordial earth. A forgotten shrine, perhaps, or the sunken bones of a village swallowed by time and water, now revealed by the unnatural depth of winter's grip. My breath plumed before me, each exhalation a brief, visible ghost. The lead researcher turned to me, his gaze pleading. Dean, we need to regroup. He pointed a trembling finger at the biologist. She heard me. She knows what I was thinking. How could she know? The biologist flinched, pulling away from the lead researcher's supportive hand. It wasn't me. It was I who spoke it. You think I trust any of you? A tremor ran through me. This wasn't just stress. This was a deep, festering paranoia, blooming like a poisonous flower in the barren landscape of our minds. I looked from one face to the next, seeing not colleagues but strangers, their features distorted by suspicion, their eyes darting, searching for unseen enemies. I walked towards the edge of the frozen lake, the crunch of my boots on the packed snow a harsh counterpoint to the rising tension behind me. The wind, a mournful lament, swept across the ice, carrying with it the faint, almost imperceptible groan of the lake shifting beneath its frozen skin. It felt like the land itself was sighing or perhaps breathing. There, etched into the ice, not by nature's hand but with deliberate, crude strokes, was a symbol. It was a spiral, not a perfect geometric shape, but an uneven, looping coil that seemed to draw the eye inward deeper and deeper. It was vaguely familiar, a motif I'd seen in old folklore texts, associated with ancient earth spirits and forgotten rites. But here, on this desolate lake, it pulsed with a malevolent energy that made my skin prickle. "Dean, what is it?" The lead researcher's voice was closer now, hesitant. I knelt, tracing the icy contours of the symbol with a gloved finger. It wasn't fresh. The edges were softened by time and the elements, yet its presence felt overwhelmingly immediate. This wasn't a natural phenomenon, nor was it a random act. Someone had carved this or something. "It's a mark," I stated, my voice low, trying to keep the tremor from it. "An old one." The cartographer peered over my shoulder, his breath catching. "A ward or an invitation." He looked around nervously, as if expecting something to rise from the depths. "They say these old places, they remember." The biologist scoffed, though her eyes were wide with a fear she tried to mask. "Superstition, it's just a mark, probably one of us trying to spook the others." She looked pointedly at the cartographer, then at me. "And who would do that?" I asked, rising slowly, my gaze sweeping across their faces. The question hung in the air, thick with suspicion, each of us now a suspect in the eyes of the others. The wind howled, a sudden, fierce gust that whipped snow into our faces, blurring the edges of the frozen lake, blurring the edges of our sanity. The cartographer took a step back, his eyes fixed on the biologist. "You've been restless, muttering in your sleep, I heard you. And you've been sketching things," the biologist retorted, her voice rising again. "Things that aren't on any map, symbols like that one." She pointed a trembling finger at the spiral, then at the cartographer. The lead researcher stepped between them once more, but his authority was crumbling like ice under a heavy weight. "Enough, we are a team." I looked at the spiral again, then out across the endless frozen expanse. The truth, I realized with a sickening lurch, was not just that we were being preyed upon, but that the predator was using us. It was feeding on our doubts, our resentments, turning our own histories into weapons. The lake groaned again, a deep, resonant sound, and I could almost hear it laughing. The chill that clung to Dean's skin was a familiar companion now, a constant reminder of the world's indifference, yet his mind burned with an unfamiliar, almost feverish clarity. The bickering, the escalating paranoia amongst the others, had become a dull thrum beneath the insistent rhythm of his own thoughts. He had to understand. The symbols, etched not just on ancient stone, but now, it seemed, upon the very fabric of their fractured sanity, pulsed with a silent, terrifying message. He walked away from the flickering firelight of their makeshift camp, the crunch of frozen snow beneath his boots the only sound in the vast, suffocating quiet. The air bit at his exposed cheeks, stealing his breath in frosty plumes. A determination, cold and sharp as the winter night, propelled him towards the expanse of the frozen lake. Here, amidst the stark, unyielding beauty, he hoped to find a stillness not available within the cramped confines of their shelter. He pulled out the worn notebook, its pages filled with his frantic sketches. The biologist's accusation, her trembling finger pointing at his spiral, echoed in the frigid air. That spiral. It was everywhere now, not just on the weathered stones of the ancient structure they had uncovered, but in the curling patterns of frost on the ice, in the twisted branches of the skeletal pines at the lake's edge. It was a glyph of inescapable presence. The spiral first. Then the jagged lines, the broken circles, the strange, branching forms that mimicked roots or veins. This wasn't a language to be spoken, he realized, not with human tongues. It was something deeper, older, a resonance that vibrated in the marrow of his bones. Each stroke of charcoal felt less like drawing and more like excavating, pulling forth a memory from the frozen depths of the earth itself. He felt the symbols not as intellectual puzzles, but as currents in a vast, unseen river. They spoke of cyclical time, of things born from the earth and returning to it, of decay and renewal not in a comforting cycle of life, but in a relentless, indifferent turning. The spiral, he understood with a sickening lurch of recognition, was not a path towards enlightenment or progress. It was a drain, an endless descent, a slow unwinding into nothingness. The language wasn't meant to convey information, not in the way humans communicated. It was a direct imprint, a psychic stain. It was the raw, unfiltered essence of the ancient entity, a primordial presence that had slumbered beneath the earth for eons, stirred awake by their clumsy intrusion. The symbols were its dream, its memory, its very being made manifest. They spoke of a vast, unfeeling existence, of forces that sculpted mountains and gouged valleys without thought or intention. They were the distilled essence of cosmic indifference, of a universe, or perhaps more accurately, an ancient primal earth that simply was, and cared nothing for the transient flicker of human life. There was no malice in it, no malevolent intent, only the crushing weight of utter, profound apathy. Humanity's struggle, its hopes, its fears, they were less than dust motes in the vast, indifferent breath of this ancient, slumbering thing. He saw it now in the glint of the stars reflected in the ice in the silent, watchful trees. They were not hostile, they simply existed, unconcerned. To understand it was to dissolve into it. Dean clutched the notebook, his fingers stiff and aching. The knowledge was a burden heavier than any physical weight. He had to return, armed with a clarity that might shatter the others completely or perhaps shatter him first. The bickering, a ragged, ceaseless drone, had become a distant hum, a mosquito's whine lost in the vastness of my own skull. The chill that clung to my skin, a familiar companion now, was no longer merely physical. It hummed with an inner frost, sharpening the edges of my perception. An unfamiliar clarity burned behind my eyes, a feverish light illuminating the path no one else seemed to see. The others, caught in their spiraling paranoia, were adrift, but I felt a strange, magnetic pull, a deep current tugging me towards something elemental, something forgotten. My boots crunched over the brittle, starved earth, each step a deliberate rupture in the profound silence. I moved with an instinct I couldn't name, a whisper in my mind guiding me past the twisted, gnarled trees that clawed at the slate-gray sky, their branches like arthritic fingers. The wind, a mournful lament, plucked at my heavy coat, threatening to tear away the last vestiges of warmth. My breath plumed in frozen blossoms, each exhalation a brief, fragile cloud against the encroaching twilight. And then I saw it, the frozen lake. A vast, unblemished mirror of gray ice, stretching to meet the horizon, reflecting the bruised sky with an unsettling fidelity. It lay utterly still, a sheet of ancient glass, silent and profound. The surface was an intricate tapestry of cracks, fine as spiderwebs, radiating outwards from unseen points of pressure, hinting at the immense, crushing forces held captive beneath. I walked onto its surface, each step a tentative invasion of its pristine solitude. The ice groaned beneath my weight, a low, resonant sigh that vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my spine, and into the very core of my bones. It began subtly, a ripple across the surface of my consciousness, not seen with my eyes but felt deep within the marrow. The lake itself seemed to hum, a low, resonant thrum that bypassed my ears and settled directly into my inner ear, a vibration of pure thought. My mind, already sharpened by the feverish clarity, became a conduit. I saw them then, or rather I felt them, not as living beings with flesh and blood, but as colossal, shifting forms woven from the very fabric of existence. Their forms were fluid, like water held in a vast, unseen hand or smoke coalescing from the deep earth. They had no faces, no limbs, no discernible features, yet their presence was undeniable, an immense, patient awareness that permeated everything. I understood with a terrifying certainty that these were the architects of the ancient structure, the true inhabitants of this forgotten place. Their psychology, if such a human word could even apply, was a complete and utter indifference. They did not hate, nor did they love. They simply were. They observed not with curiosity, but with the detached patience of stone witnessing the erosion of mountains. Their existence was a slow, majestic dance of cosmic indifference, cycles of creation and decay on scales incomprehensible to human minds. They were not malicious. Malice implied intent, a spark of emotion. They were merely vast, ancient, and utterly uncaring. They built the immense vessel not as a home or a tool, but as a temporary expression of their being, a fleeting thought solidified in metal and bone-like material before the next cycle of dissolution began. The psychic residue that had plagued us, turning us against each other, was not a weapon or a curse, but merely the lingering echo of their vast, unfeeling consciousness, a resonance of their primordial indifference, too immense and alien for human minds to process without shattering. We were less than ants to them, less than motes of dust. We were not even a thought. The wind still sang its dirge, the frozen lake still stretched, an unblinking eye beneath the bruised sky. But the world was irrevocably altered. I stood, my legs stiff, the knowledge a heavy, leaden weight in my chest. And in that moment I understood the true horror of our predicament. We were not being hunted. We were simply insignificant, caught in the slow, unfeeling turning of a much larger, much older world. The others, with their petty squabbles and dwindling hopes, were lost in a dream of meaning that had never existed. An unfamiliar clarity settled upon me, a chilling understanding that the true cold was not of the air, but of the creeping rot within the hearts around me, and perhaps within my own. The air in the monolithic structure, a place we had once foolishly called a vessel, now thrummed with a low, dissonant chord, a vibration that settled deep in the bones. It was a song of slow unraveling, a melody of frayed nerves and snapping sanity. My boots crunched on the dust and ancient debris that littered the pathways, each step a testament to the structure's vast, forgotten age. The engineer, a man usually tethered to logic and intricate schematics, now sat hunched in a corner, muttering to himself. His hands, once deft and precise, clawed at the air, tracing invisible patterns known only to him. His eyes, wide and unfocused, seemed to see through the very walls, into some other unseen dimension of torment. She clutched a rusted piece of metal, a shard from the structure itself, as if it were a sacred relic, telling them what they already know, what they fear. I didn't answer her. My attention was drawn to a commotion down the corridor, a sudden crescendo of shouting and a harsh, metallic clang. The captain's voice, usually a booming command, was now a shrill, desperate cry. I moved towards it, my steps deliberate, a heavy weight in my chest. It was the resolve of a man walking into a storm he knew he could not outrun, only endure. I rounded a bend, the air thick with the acrid scent of fear and something else, something metallic and sharp. There in the dim, pulsing light, the captain stood over the communications officer, a heavy, blunted pipe clutched in his hand. He was trying to leave us. The captain shrieked, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. He was going to betray us to them, to the ones in the ice. He gestured wildly towards the structure's massive, arched entrance, a gate that opened onto the desolate, snow-swept landscape outside. My breath hitched. The captain, once the pillar of our expedition, was broken. This was the complete breakdown, the unraveling I had sensed. "Captain," I said, my voice low, an attempt at calm in the swirling vortex of madness, "put the pipe down." He turned on me, his eyes burning with an insane light. "You don't understand, Caldwell. They're waiting, watching from the frozen lake." My gaze drifted past him through the gaping maw of the structure's entrance. Beyond lay the stark, desolate expanse of the icy wilderness, and in the distance a vast, flat expanse of white, the frozen lake. It stretched for miles, a gleaming, indifferent mirror reflecting the pale, bruised sky. I had seen nothing but an empty, windswept sheet of ice, yet in his eyes I saw monstrous shapes stirring beneath the surface, ancient evils rising from the depths. This was the reveal. The corruption wasn't just turning us against each other. It was twisting our perceptions of the very world around us, making us see horrors in the mundane, malevolence in the natural. The structure was a conduit, amplifying the primal fear of the desolate land, the ancient, silent power of the ice and stone. The captain lunged, not at me, but towards the fallen officer, his pipe raised again. "He won't escape." I reacted instinctively, a surge of adrenaline sharpening my movements. I tackled the captain, bringing him down with a jarring thud. The pipe clattered away, skittering across the floor. He thrashed beneath me, a wild, guttural roar tearing from his throat, his hands clawing at my face, attempting to gouge my eyes. I wrestled him, the stench of his fear filling my nostrils, the madness in his eyes reflecting my own growing desperation. "Hold him," I shouted, my voice raw. The navigator, her face pale and drawn, stumbled forward, her rusted shard still clutched in her hand. The engineer remained in his corner, murmuring to the invisible roots. No help would come from them. I would not let this ancient evil claim us all, not while I still drew breath. The captain's wild eyes, devoid of reason, burned into mine as he thrashed beneath me. His hands, surprisingly strong, clawed at my neck, seeking purchase. A desperate strength surged through my own limbs, fueled by the cold clarity of imminent danger. I slammed his head against the deck plating, a dull thud echoing in the confined space. He went slack for a moment, his breath rasping, and I scrambled away, snatching the discarded pipe before he could recover. My own chest heaved, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear and something else, the ship's insidious hum, a low thrum against my bones that felt like a whispered curse from an ancient grave. "Dean!" A voice, ragged and strained, cut through the oppressive quiet. I spun, pipe raised, to see the security officer stumbling around a jutting console, one arm clutched to their side. Their face was pale, streaked with grime, but their eyes held a flicker of grim determination. "The broadcast. It's in the central chamber. I think I found a way to disrupt it. A manual override, deep within the primary conduit." My gaze met theirs, a silent understanding passing between us. The captain was stirring, a low growl rumbling in his throat as he pushed himself onto all fours, his gaze locking onto me with predatory intent. There was no time for words. "Go!" I yelled, pointing deeper into the vessel's labyrinthine corridors. "I'll buy what I can." The security officer hesitated, then nodded sharply, their figure already retreating into the gloom. I turned back to the captain, the heavy pipe feeling both inadequate and utterly essential in my grip. This wasn't a man I knew. It was a puppet, a vessel for the ship's unseen influence, driven by a primal, animalistic rage. He lunged, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, and I met him, the clang of metal on metal echoing like a bell tolling a dire warning. I moved with a desperate urgency, propelled by the memory of the security officer's retreating form. My aim was not to harm, but to incapacitate, to delay. A sudden, jarring impact sent me sprawling. The captain was on me in an instant, his hands closing around my throat, fingers like iron bands. I scrabbled, my vision blurring, and then with a final, desperate surge, I drove my knee upward, connecting with a sickening crunch. The captain gasped, his grip loosening, and I rolled free, gasping for air. My throat raw, I didn't look back. There was no time. The ship seemed to groan around me, the very metal of its walls vibrating with an unholy resonance. The corridors twisted and turned, each junction a new gamble, until I burst into a vast, echoing space. It was immense, stretching into the gloom, lit by an eerie, pulsating luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air. But what truly stole my breath was the floor. It was a frozen lake. My mind, already frayed at the edges, struggled to reconcile the impossible. Here, in the heart of a derelict alien vessel, lay a sheet of impossibly smooth obsidian ice stretching out of sight. My boots, designed for starship decks, felt clumsy on the slick surface, each step a precarious slide. It throbbed with a sickly violet light, the source of the ship's psychic emanation, a silent scream woven into reality. This was it. The broadcast. This wasn't just a physical journey, it was a descent into a nightmare. Then a sound behind me, a groan, a heavy thud. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest. Behind them, lumbering forward with terrifying purpose, was the captain, no longer simply enraged but a grotesque caricature of his former self, eyes glowing with an internal, malevolent light. "Dean, go!" The security officer gasped, pushing themselves up with a supreme effort. They held a heavy pipe, one that looked eerily familiar, and with a guttural roar they launched themselves at the captain, a desperate, valiant attempt to buy me precious seconds. I watched, paralyzed for a terrifying beat as they clashed, the sounds of struggle echoing across the frozen expanse. I saw the captain raise his arm, saw the security officer falter, and then with a sickening crack they fell, their body crumpling onto the ice. A wave of profound grief, sharp and bitter, washed over me, threatening to drown me in its icy depths. But there was no time for sorrow, only purpose. I turned and ran, sliding across the frozen lake, the monolithic structure growing larger, more terrible with every stride. Visions slammed into my mind, not of malice but of an unimaginable cosmic loneliness, an entity so vast and old it predated meaning, merely existing. The broadcast wasn't an attack. It was a song of utter indifference, a primal hum of the universe's vast, uncaring emptiness, broadcast from a heart that felt no joy, no sorrow, only an infinite desolate echo. This ship was not a weapon. It was a tomb, its very presence anathema to life, its song a slow, inevitable unmaking. The air around me crackled, the violet light intensifying, pushing against my mind like an invisible hand. I tore it open, revealing a tangle of conduits, pulsing with the same insidious energy. This wasn't about complex circuits. It was about severing a connection, disrupting a flow. I saw a thick, braided cable glowing faintly, humming with malevolent life. This was the primary conduit. This was the heart of it all.